What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, May 9th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Massive 12-game slate tonight. No weather issues, so that makes life a little bit easier. But a lot of good hitting spots, some good pitching. Not as much pitching as you would typically expect on a 12-gamer, but still some good spots to get to. A lot of really good offensive spots, especially later on. If you're playing the 4-game night slate, I think that'll be a really fun one because there's a lot of offense there. We're going to go through game by game, as always, using the Run the Sims projections that you see on the screen. These are the projections that the group of us over at Endgame put together, doing our best to create projections that basically took the information out of Utical's head and put them onto paper. I've been really happy with these so far. I've had success with them so far. So really excited to be using these, really excited they're available and to continue using them. Thank you, chat, for the congrats. It was much needed. It's been a rough year so far overall, but baseball's been good, so hopefully that continues. We're going to go through game by game, and I will touch on what my player exposures would look like right now, but also I can tell you just at a quick glance that they're going to change between now and lock for the obvious reasons that lineups are still coming out, ownership's going to change, but also I tried something a little bit different, and it didn't quite work, so I can see players already that I have that I know that I won't, but I will touch on those if I see anything interesting. And other than that, I'll dig into what looks good from every game. I will try and move as quickly as I can through games that don't look as interesting just because there are 24 teams to talk about. Trey said, what's up with the Orioles this year? Underperformance, bad luck, and injuries, like a combination of all three. They've obviously been disappointing, but at the same time, and I could talk for an hour about this, like Orioles fans are looking at their record and judging them based on expectations. But like the expectations, if Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez miss the entire first month and a half of the season and half the team is on the injured list, the expectations would have been really low. So it's a lot of different things. Offensively, they have a few guys that have hit into really bad luck too. So I think they'll get better. I've been tempted to place some bets on them to win the division or win the American League or whatever. But the fact the Yankees are good scares me because it just kind of forces them into the wild card route most likely. But I do think they end up getting better. It's just a matter of, have they dug too big of a hole? Jorge said, can you remind me where to find your deep dive article? It's on the Run the Sims site. If you go to RTS Tools, MLB Deep Dives, it is there. I assume that you were able to see that when I did it just now. But if not, I used words also. So that is there for anybody looking for it. It won't be out every single day, but it will be out most days. That's just my article breaking things down game by game. It went up about an hour ago. Obviously, takes a long time to write on a 12-gamer, but that is there as well if you're somebody that prefers reading. So starting with the Brewers taking on the Rays in Tampa Bay, not Tropicana Field, but Tampa Bay. Reminder that this stadium is most likely going to play pretty neutral for home runs in night games and then be very home run friendly in day games. It does seem, and obviously early in the season, you have a lot of noise in park factor data, but it does seem that right field is going to play small, just like actual Yankee Stadium does. This is the minor league, the single A Yankees Stadium. But like if you were watching the game last night, the Phillies Rays game, I had a lot of exposure to that one, so I was watching it, and there were a lot of balls hit in that game that off the bat I thought were like no doubt home runs. Trey Turner in particular had one that did not get out. Trey Turner's got like to the wall and ended up being a double, but then there were balls to right field that just looked like fly balls off the bat and were not even close to staying in the stadium. So I do think that regardless of time of day, if you have guys that can hit the ball, either right-handed hitters that can take it to right or left-handed power bats, that is probably going to play up in the stadium, it seems like. But also, I expect day games to be really homer friendly there, and then night games to be a little bit more straight up. But in this one, we do have a pretty high total. Zach Little on the mound for Tampa Bay. Jose Quintana going for the Brewers. These are two of the three lowest stuff plus grades on the entire slate of anybody pitching coming from Little and Quintana. I'm not interested in getting to either guy. If I went to one, it would be Little just because he's 6,500. I have no idea how to possibly justify $8,700 for Jose Quintana on a 12-game slate. But most likely just not really going to be getting to pitching in this one. It is a tough strikeout matchup going against Milwaukee. It's a better strikeout for Quintana, but again, just not a good strikeout pitcher. So I don't really have interest in the pitching. I do think that the bats look relatively interesting here. On the Milwaukee side, Zach Littell has allowed power to both sides of the plate going back to last season. Again, I do think that right field is going to play small in this stadium from what I've seen. So ideally, you would get to some left-handed power bats from the Brewers. They don't really have a ton of that. Christian Yelich is your best bet at $4,500. Jake Bauers is in the lineup, but he's batting 8th, and he does carry pinch hit risk as well. So from a left-handed power standpoint, Yelich is the one that looks the best. You do have Bryce Turang, Sal Frelick, and Bauers in the lineup as well from the left side. Little has given up power to righties as well, but again, I think it's just going to play a little bit more neutral for right-handed power bats. That being said, 5 to 10% ownership coming into Yelich, Chourio, Contreras. I think all of that is fine. And then it's 5% or less to the rest of this lineup. Basically, I agree with the field. I think that it's a perfectly fine spot to get to Milwaukee. They have around the 5 implied run total. They have some speed in their lineup. They have power in their lineup. They're facing a pitcher that gives up power. Tampa Bay played a game last night where they did have to use their bullpen pretty heavily. That game went to extra innings after they blew it late in the game. So you do have a little bit of a worn down bullpen for them. I'm pulling up their actual bullpen usage now if it loads to see exactly what they have. But you do have that, working in Milwaukee's favor as well. Potentially, tired bullpen. They used every pitcher in their bullpen yesterday with the exception of 2 of them. 4 of those guys had also pitched on Wednesday. So you actually have a really shorthanded Tampa Bay bullpen here. And what that really matters for is that if Milwaukee jumps out early to a big lead, and then let's say they hang, 5-6 runs in the first couple innings on Zach Littell. So Tampa Bay takes him out. They bring in their long guy. Let's say he struggles. Chances are Tampa Bay is just going to say, tough shit. Go out there and give us 3 innings. I don't care if you give up 20 runs today. So you do get a little bit of an added ceiling, I think, for the Brewers here, given that I think it's very, very likely that 4 different guys in this Tampa Bay bullpen are not going to be available to pitch today because they pitched the last 2 days. So you do get a little bit of an added ceiling there that I think is interesting. So you can factor that into your stacking as well. On the other side for Tampa Bay, taking on Milwaukee, you do have some right-handed power bats here going up against Quintana, who does struggle a bit with right-handed power. There is going to be a little bit of pinch hit risk here as well for the platoon guys. Curtis Mead certainly can get pinch hit for later on in the game once you get a righty in there. Caballero potentially gets pinch hit for later on. Morel maybe, but not as likely, I don't think. Yandy Diaz stands out as the priority to me here. I'm a little surprised he's only projected for about 7% ownership. He's still just sitting here at $3,800. He's gotten off to a slow start this year against left-handed pitching, but this is somebody that, has the platoon advantage and historically hits it well. His home run last night did come off of a lefty reliever. And so I think with the multi-position eligibility and the cheap price tag, he just looks good here. 232 expected ISO against left-handed pitching in 327 plate appearances since the start of the 2023 season. 406 expected WOBA. These are not numbers that typically come with a $3,800 salary. So he looks like a priority to me. And then perfectly fine getting to some Junior Caminero, Danny Jansen, Christopher Morel. $3,600 Brandon Lau batting cleanup, I think, is an interesting one because he is getting the start lefty-lefty. And you don't really like the matchup for him against Quintana, who is better against lefties, as you would expect. But especially if you're full stacking, if you're stacking this team, you're hoping that they just, get to Quintana early, and then you probably have the platoon advantage later on in the game for Brandon Lau at basically no ownership because people don't want him in the lefty-lefty matchup. So from a stacking standpoint, I think he's an interesting piece to mix in, but Yandy Diaz is my favorite hitter here from Tampa and my favorite hitter actually in this entire game. Philadelphia taking on the Guardians in Cleveland. This is an interesting one from a pitching standpoint. Aaron Nola going for Philadelphia, Gavin Williams on the mound for the Guardians. The matchup is not very good for either one of these guys, but the salaries are pretty appealing. And going back to what I mentioned at the top of the show, there's a lot of solid pitching on this slate, but it's not a slate where you have Very, very clear-cut mid-range options in particular. This is not like the other day when you had $8,800 Chris Sale that was just a very easy, click and then move on. It's not like yesterday where you had $7,700 Schwellenbach just completely mispriced. You don't have that today. The pitchers that are in, like the most talented pitchers that are in the best matchups are really expensive on DraftKings. Hunter Brown is coming in at $11K. Max Meyer is coming in at $10,200. And so that does create a little bit more interest in guys like Aaron Nola and Gavin Williams, even though the matchups aren't particularly appealing. Gavin Williams, only $6,800 from just a pure talent versus salary standpoint. This is one of the more underpriced guys on the slate. Now, when you factor in the matchup against Philadelphia, it comes out a little bit closer to correctly priced. But, because this matchup is very difficult, Philadelphia has the 10th highest WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They rank 28th in strikeout percentage. So it's a really, really tough matchup for Williams, but he is somebody that going back to last year has a 24% strikeout percentage. You've seen a little bit of an uptick in his stuff so far this year. Stuff plus jumping slightly from 101.4 to 102.1. Strikeout percentage up about 1.5. Fastball velo up about half a mile per hour. So he has solid strikeout stuff for a $6,800 pitcher, but it is a scary matchup. This team does not strike out. And, you saw it yesterday with Pepio, who's a good strikeout pitcher, just unable to get Ks against this team. And obviously they have a lot of guys that are capable of doing damage as well. But there is 18% projected ownership coming into Williams. I do think from just a pure value standpoint, he makes some sense. And then Nola on the other side, 8,300, good price tag for Aaron Nola. But this matchup against Cleveland scares me because, for one, it's a difficult team to strike out. When you have Steven Kwan at the top of the order, you have Jose Ramirez batting third. This is a team that just does not have a lot of strikeouts in their lineup. Their active roster overall against right-handed pitching this year ranks 21st in K percentage. But then, when you look at the top of the order specifically, it's really low K guys. And those are the guys, of course, that Nola is going to face the most often. But then the other thing that really concerns me about this matchup is not only is it a low K matchup, especially at the top of the order, it's an extremely left-handed heavy lineup against Nola. Going back to last season, only a 21.5% K percentage against lefties compared to 27.5% against righties. He's also allowed a 177 expected ISO against left-handed hitters since last year. This year, the strikeout numbers are up a little bit to both sides of the plate, 23.7% to lefties, 28.9% to righties, but he's also allowed a 264 expected ISO to lefties. So what you have over the last couple of seasons with Aaron Nola is a significantly lower strikeout percentage against lefties than righties and a lot more power allowed to lefties than righties. And now you have him facing an almost entirely left-handed lineup in the park that is, I believe, 8th best for left-handed home runs since last season, when Cleveland changed the design of, I believe, their upper deck and basically created a wind tunnel that blows the ball out to right field. So all of that does really scare me for this matchup. But that being said, he is still a good pitcher, and there's no mid-range pitching on this slate that I'm going to point to it and say, there's nothing that I dislike about this. So Aaron Nola getting 28% ownership. He's showing up around 25% of the time for me. I think it's just a spot where it's very risky. I don't feel good about it, but kind of just going to have to grin and bear it and hope that he has a good game. Or, if you end up with a lineup that's doing really well that doesn't have him, then he doesn't have a good game. As far as the bats go here, if this were a smaller slate, I would be really interested in this game because you are getting ownership to both pitchers. And I think that it is a very risky spot for both pitchers. So you have a park that's good for home runs now. You have a talented Philadelphia offense going up against a 15 to 20% owned pitcher. But the problem is that it's very difficult to prioritize them because, we haven't gotten there yet. Milwaukee and Tampa both look good, that first game, but we're going to get to a Coors game that looks fantastic. We're going to get to an Orioles-Angels game that looks amazing. You have the Yankees in a great spot. You have the Dodgers and Diamondbacks in a game with like a 10.5 total. So you have these late games in particular on the slate that look really, really good, and it makes it difficult to say, I really want a lot of Philadelphia. So basically, I think if you get to some Philly, Turner, Harper, Schwarber, Stott, obviously those guys are fine, but I'm not going to be the one to sit here and say like, oh, you should be playing a ton of these guys, because there's going to be a lot of guys that look just like that across the slate. And I'm not going to tell you that you should be prioritizing 140 different hitters on the slate. So it's the same thing on the Cleveland side. Like if this were a 5 or a 6 game slate, I would love the idea of getting to some of these left-handed bats against Nola. But on this slate, if you get some Jose Ramirez, sure. But you have Manny Machado in cores. You have a $3,700 Ryan McMahon in cores against Randy Vasquez. Those are just 2 third basemen off the top of my head. Competing with Ramirez. If you get to some Steven Kwan, like great, but you have a million good outfield plays. So it just becomes really difficult to prioritize the bats here, even though I could make an argument for them. Cubs taking on the Mets in New York. Clay Holmes on the mound for the Mets. Jameson Taillon is going for the Cubs. Clay Holmes, 8,200. He fits very strongly into the like Aaron Nola mold, I think, of mid-range pitching that is going to get some ownership just because it's there and because he's relatively talented. I'm not getting to much of him right now. That is something that could change. It is a very unappealing matchup. This Cubs team is good. They have the 18th highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching so far this year. They're 6th in WRC+. Clay Holmes has been solid so far in his move to the starting rotation. He has struck out 25% of hitters, 3.36 xFIP. So, and you're in a good park for pitching as well. So I think, and it's reflected in the implied run total for the Cubs, also down around 4 for an offense that does have this much talent. Clay Holmes is fine. I don't feel good about it. I'm not going to be surprised at all if it goes wrong. But just like is the case with Gavin Williams, just like was the case with Aaron Nola, that's kind of what you're getting on this slate. So I'm not getting a ton of Holmes right now, but I think he looks fine. Wouldn't mind getting more if I ended up getting there. Jameson Taillon on the other side, 8K, not getting near as much ownership. I think he's just a step behind in terms of talent compared to, your Clay Holmes or Aaron Nola, other guys in this price range as well. He, since the start of last season, only an 18.7% strikeout percentage, 4.13 xFIP. Like he's an okay real life pitcher, but he's not a great DFS guy. And you're paying a relatively high salary for him in a tough spot against the Mets. When I saw the matchup, I was expecting to see like Gavin Williams' $6,800 price tag or something on Jameson Taillon, not an 8K price tag. So to me, if you are going pitching here, Clay Holmes is the one that I would rather get to. Offensively, I think the Cubs are very similar to what I just said about the Phillies. If you happen to make a lineup that has Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki and Ian Happ, like, cool, you have a really high ceiling. There's stolen base upside, there's power upside, but at the end of the day, there's just a million really, really good spots to get to today. And the other thing is that, and this is true pretty much whenever you have a 12-game slate, you're going to get, 2-3% ownership on these good Cubs hitters. You're going to be able to find guys that just look better at like 5-6% ownership. Like ownership in general is just going to be so spread out that you can kind of just go towards the plays that really project the best more than you can in large field tournaments on like a 5 or a 6 game slate. So very similar thinking on the Cubs as the Phillies. On the Mets side, I do like them a little bit more than the Cubs, specifically Juan Soto. $5,200 price tag just continues to stand out for him. We got the 2 home run game the other day. I think there's more of those coming. I mentioned it in an article, or I mentioned it on a show the other day. I mentioned it in my article today. Juan Soto has been a little bit disappointing from a fantasy standpoint so far this year, but he has also hit into a lot of bad luck. His expected WOBA so far this season actually is the 3rd best of his career. So you're not getting, reduced actual performance from Soto in terms of quality of contact. But then one other kind of sneaky thing that I like in this spot for Juan Soto is that Jameson Taillon has a walk percentage of only 4.9% since last season. One of the things that hurts Juan Soto the most as a DFS play, and it makes him very good as a real life hitter, but he's so willing to take walks. He walks, 17, 18, 19% of the time. That's not what you're looking for when you pay $5K, $5,500, $6K for a hitter. You want them putting the ball in play. You want the home run upside that comes with them. You don't want the guy that's just going to stand there and be like, yeah, cool, you didn't throw me a pitch that I want, so I'm going to go get you 2 fantasy points in 3 different plate appearances. Jameson Taillon's likely to be working in the strike zone, and that increases your ceiling for Juan Soto to actually need to put the ball in play and not be able to just draw walks. So that is, kind of a sneaky thing that makes me like Soto a bit here as well. Beyond him, kind of the same thing as the Cubs and the Phillies. Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo. If you get to a little bit of those guys, great. They're good, but they're just not going to be as easy to prioritize as some of the other offenses later on. Marlins are taking on the White Sox in Chicago. Max Meyer on the mound for the Marlins. Bryce Wilson going for the White Sox. Max Meyer is one of the pitchers that I was referring to earlier that is very clearly in a good spot, but DraftKings got aggressive with the pricing here, and they'd actually done it with him in his last start as well. So you have Max Meyer at $10,200. Now, on the one hand, there are 24 offenses today, so you can find value bets. There is, without a doubt, 100% going to be plenty of cheap bats that go for, 5, 6, 7 times 8 times their salary or whatever. So overpaying a little bit for pitcher is fine. You're not going to have trouble making good lineups that do it. But he is still pretty expensive here. And if he just goes out there and gets you 15, 16, 17 DraftKings points, you are going to be in a position basically 100% of the time, because there's 23 other pitchers, where you're now competing with a bunch of lineups that saved money at pitcher. And so now you have your $3,500 guy competing against some $5,500 hitters. So there is a pretty small margin for error still at this salary, given how many just pitchers there are on this slate. He's getting about 15% ownership. We have seen a big jump in production from him so far this season. Last year, he struck out 18.5% of hitters. His average fastball velo was 94.1 miles an hour. Stuff plus grade was 88.1. So far this year, Stuff plus in 39 innings is up to 95.4. So that's a jump of over 7 points. His K percentage is up to 28.1%. That's nearly a 10-point jump in strikeout percentage. Fastball velo is up nearly a full mile per hour. So all of that stuff looks good, especially in the context of, keep in mind, this is an early draft pick, a highly regarded prospect. The strikeout percentage is a little bit misleading. He struck out 14 guys against the Reds on April 21st. But he does have 2 other games with 8 strikeouts. He struck out 7 in his first start against the Pirates, struck out 6 against the Mariners. So the strikeout percentage is misleading. And he does have a start his last time out where he got 0. So that pulls it down a little bit as well. So I do think he is very likely a much better strikeout pitcher than he was last year. 28%, maybe not. But you also get, the good matchup here against the White Sox. Their active roster against right-handed pitching is second to last in WRC plus this year. The only team that's been less productive is the Rockies. They're 5th in strikeout percentage at 24.1%. So everything looks good for Meyer if you can afford him. For Bryce Wilson, he's 5,500. He's facing the Marlins. That's the only positive things I have to say about Bryce Wilson. I don't think you really are going to need to be able to, need to get to him on this slate. He is not a particularly good pitcher. 16.5% strikeout percentage, 11.5% walk percentage, 5.59 xFIP as a starter since last season. This is just not somebody that I think you're going to want to rely on very much. And I think everybody in the world probably agrees with me outside of maybe his immediate family members. Offensively, I do like the Marlins here, and I'm a little surprised they're not getting more ownership. This is a similar park for home runs as Miami, so you don't really get a change there. But you have some pretty reasonable pricing here, and you have a pitcher in Wilson that is not good at limiting power. You also have a White Sox bullpen that just isn't very good because nobody that plays for the White Sox is very good. The only negative, kind of, is that the White Sox do have 4 left-handed pitchers in their bullpen. One of them probably is not available today because Jared Schuster threw 42 pitches yesterday. But you will be able to match up, or they will be able to match up with left-handed bats on the Marlins. But you can go to right-handed bats against Wilson as well. Going back to last season, 17% K percentage to lefties, 18% to righties, 205 expected ISO to lefties, 201 to righties. Not a big difference in terms of expected power numbers or strikeout percentage, regardless of which side of the plate you hit from. And there is actually some power in this Miami lineup. Jesus Sanchez, $3,500 price tag. Since last season against right-handed pitching, 226 expected ISO, 365 expected WOBA. So he's cheap. He's batting second. Xavier Edwards is leading off. Not a great hitter, but we have him with, I believe, the 7th or 8th highest stolen base projection on this slate. This is one thing that I like about our projections a lot. And as a reminder, you can use these. These are publicly available. Link is in the description below. He's up to 3rd now. He's tied with Pete Crow Armstrong for 3rd in stolen base projection today. So you can see there, he doesn't have much home run upside at all, but he has plenty of stolen base upside if he gets on here against Wilson. So that makes him look good. And then getting back to the relatively solid power bats in this lineup, Ramirez only has 44 plate appearances since coming up from the minors, but he projects to be an above average power guy, projects for basically league average production overall offensively, but above average power. You have him as a $4,000 catching option, batting cleanup. That looks pretty good. Kyle Stowers has hit very well overall this season. And one thing that I really like about this matchup for Stowers, who is batting fifth, is that Wilson doesn't generate swings and misses. Kyle Stowers hits the ball hard. He hits the ball far. He doesn't make a lot of contact, but you're getting a pitcher in Wilson that doesn't get swings and misses. 199 expected ISO against right-handed pitching since the start of last season for Stowers. So far this year in his 101 plate appearances, though, a 416 expected WOBA, a 287 expected ISO, and to the point that I was making before, 33.7% K percentage, 20% swinging strike percentage, but also a 91 mile per hour average exit velocity against a pitcher that just doesn't get a lot of swing and miss. Connor Norby has some power as well. He is coming in at $3,700, 200 expected ISO for him against right-handed pitching since the start of last season. So this like Edwards, Sanchez, Ramirez, Stowers, Norby portion of the lineup, I think actually looks good. And then you have Eric Wagman hitting third, kind of looking out of place, but from a stacking standpoint, at least, still fine. And he is only 3,200 with MPE as well. So I do like the Marlins a bit more than the field does. I think they're a team that you can use also to maybe get to Max Meyer, maybe get to Hunter Brown, and then still have good one-offs or secondary stacks as well. Also, you can grab 2 or 3 of these guys, save some salary, mix them into a more expensive stack. There's a lot of different ways, I think, to make the Marlins fit into lineups, and I do like them here quite a bit. On the other side, I'm good on the White Sox, I think. I'm double checking to make sure I didn't like randomly get a bunch of them, but no, I don't have them in lineups. The field's not going to get to them. I really see zero reason to get to the White Sox when 23 other teams are playing. It's hard enough to get to the White Sox when 3 or 4 other teams or 5 other teams are playing. I guess 4 other teams are never playing, but 3 or 5. Boston taking on Kansas City. In Kansas City, park downgrade for the Red Sox. 4 home runs in particular. Again, this is a good park. I mention it every time, but it's a good park for scoring runs in an actual baseball game. It is not a good park for hitting home runs. And obviously hitting home runs is more important for scoring fantasy points than scoring actual runs. So that, does suck for Boston. They have a relatively high total here, but it's not likely to be the most conducive for DFS. There is plenty of talent in this lineup. I think they are basically another version, probably a little bit better version of the Cubs or the Phillies or even the Mets. They're more similar, I think, to the Mets, where they do have the higher implied run total. They are getting, 3, 4, 5% ownership. I'm getting 3 to 5% of most of the pieces that you would expect in this lineup, but still don't think there's priorities. A couple of things to single out here, though. Michael Lorenzen does give up power to both sides of the plate. He has always had some issues with right-handed power. Alex Bregman has been hitting the hell out of the ball from the right side. 207 expected ISO to right-handed hitters since last year for Lorenzen. 222 so far this season. Alex Bregman, so far this season, a 286 expected ISO against right-handed pitching in 130 plate appearances. So if you can get there, I like him. He does have MPE, but he is also $5,400. Also, Rafi Devers has been in the news for a lot of wrong reasons. The whole third base thing. Now he's refusing to play first base. He's offended they even asked. And then he also had that horrible start to the season. But he actually, in 125 plate appearances against right-handed pitching this year, has a 435 expected WOBA and a 274 expected ISO. So that start to the season has not suppressed his actual numbers, his expected power numbers so far this year. Clearly, if you get there, that's fine as well. But I mentioned it with Jose Ramirez earlier. I think Devers looks a little bit better than Ramirez, given that he's not facing Aaron Nola, but it's a really tough third base position when you have Machado and McMahon in Coors Field, in addition to, some other spots that are going to look good as well. So I think the Red Sox are a lower priority, but still high upside stack against Lorenzen. On the Kansas City side, going up against Hunter Dobbins, he is just kind of one other thing for Lorenzen. He has historically been pretty good at preventing stolen bases. So again, that's not to say don't play Trevor Story, don't play Jarren Duran, but it is going to be a relative downgrade for those guys that derive some of their DFS value from stolen bases. Lorenzen is pretty good at preventing steals. Now going to the other side, Dobbins is really just a guy, not an above average strikeout pitcher, not an elite ground ball percentage or anything like that. doesn't have good stuff, but it's going to be difficult to like love Kansas City here either, just because of the park, it being difficult for hitting home runs. And then also Connor Wong historically is good at preventing stolen bases. So that is going to be a little bit of a downgrade for Bobby Witt, for Jonathan India, for Michael Garcia. These guys that, again, just derive extra upside from stolen bases. Not to say they can't steal or they won't try, but it's not an advantageous matchup with Wong behind the plate. One spot that does stand out, very limited sample for Dobbins. He's only made 3 starts so far this season, but he has allowed a 219 expected ISO to lefties compared to a sub 100 expected ISO to righties. Vinny Pasquantino is still sitting here at $3,300. He has not been good so far this season, but he does still have a 190 expected ISO against right-handed pitching. That number probably finishes higher at the end of the year, but he is still hitting the ball reasonably hard. So as a value piece, I think he looks okay. And then I'm not getting to much, but Salvador Perez has arguably been the most unlucky hitter in baseball so far this season. Against right-handed pitching specifically, he has an actual WOBA below 300 at 310. His expected WOBA is 405. His actual ISO 149, expected ISO 251. Do not look at what Salvador Perez has done this year and conclude that Salvador Perez is finally washed and not good at hitting or anything like that. He has been hitting the shit out of the ball and just not getting production. So, something to keep in mind, but I don't really think it's super actionable for this slate because there's just 100 good hitting plays. Cincinnati taking on Houston. In Houston, Hunter Brown for the Astros, Nick Martinez for the Reds. No real interest in Nick Martinez here. 12-game slate, $7,800 price tag. Not a great strikeout matchup. He's not a bad pitcher, but I don't really see the need to get to him today. Hunter Brown getting 33% ownership. He's 11K. I want to get to him a lot. I don't have a ton right now. I would like that to change between now and lock, just because he's really, really good. Hunter Brown has always been a good pitcher. You know, you go back to last season, he had like a 25% strikeout percentage, 3.3 xFIP, somewhere in that range. He's a good pitcher. This year, everything for him is just up across the board. Stuff plus in 43 innings pitched has gone from 104.5, which is already good, to 111.2. That's a 6.5 point jump. His K percentage has gone from 25% up to 31%. His fastball velo is up a full mile per hour from 96 miles an hour to 97. So one thing I will point out here is that I slightly disagree with our projection model in terms of how deep into this game he's projected. You can see that we have just shy of a 17 out projection on Brown. He's gone at least 6 innings in every single start this year. Now, again, I know why that outs projection is there. Like, he's not going to go 6 innings in every single start, obviously. And it's, factoring in historical data for Hunter Brown and all of that. Like, I understand why it's where it is, but this is a solid matchup against the Reds. He's been markedly better at basically everything this year than last season. So I did bump his projection a little bit for me. That being said, I still didn't get as much as the field. So basically it's the negative. There's 2 negatives to Hunter Brown here. One is just simply the $11,000 price tag. He, like I was saying with Max Meyer, like, he's better than Max Meyer from a talent standpoint, but it's essentially impossible for Hunter Brown to be anywhere close to the best point per dollar pitcher on the slate, because there's 23 other guys and he's 11K. You don't need him to be the best point per dollar pitcher, but that margin for error just becomes small because there's almost guaranteed to be some group of much cheaper pitchers that put up 20 plus fantasy points today. And in large field tournaments, people are going to have them basically regardless of who they are. So that margin for error is small. He is costing you some bats on a slate where you have a lot of really good bats to pay for. The other negative here is Hunter Brown is not good at preventing stolen bases, and this is a Cincinnati team that can run. So it's very similar to the Chris Sale spot the other day, where it's obviously not likely that these guys are getting on base a lot against Brown. But if they do, he can kind of get quote unquote unlucky in that, like, let's say he just gives up a bloop single to Ellie De La Cruz or Matt McLean or TJ Friedel. Any of these guys get on first base, they are pretty quickly probably going to try and be on second base and have a pretty good chance of getting to second base. And then you're just in a position where, another bloop hit and he's given up an earned run. So that does make the volatility a little bit higher for him. Just the fact that he's not good at holding runners. And this is a team that has guys that will steal. You have Austin Hayes back in the lineup as well. I don't know if they'll look to run him straight off of the injured list, but typically he's somebody that can run a little bit. Steer can run a little bit. Fraley's back in the lineup as well. So that is a slight negative for Brown. But all things considered, I think he's the number one pitcher on the slate in terms of, like, he's the highest projected pitcher. He's the guy that if I were to enter my lineups at 7 o'clock and I see I have a pitcher in every lineup and it's Hunter Brown, I'm going to be like, cool. That just means I figured it out. I found cheap bats to pair with him, whatever. I'm going to feel, comfortable with it, however much Hunter Brown I can get to. That being said, especially in large field tournaments, if a third of the field is going to pay $11K for a pitcher, you also have a third of the field playing very similar roster constructions, because once you put 20% of your lineup into that one pitcher, 20% of your salary rather, into that one pitcher slot, you are kind of constrained by what else you can do. And so that's something to keep in mind as well, from just a roster construction standpoint. So I think one of the more interesting spots on the slate, but certainly like Hunter Brown a lot. Offensively, this is another game where I don't really have much interest. On the Cincinnati side, like I said, there is stolen base upside here. Matt McLain, Ellie De La Cruz, TJ Friedel, all grading out well in terms of stolen base projections for us. We have De La Cruz far and away number 1, McLain number 2. Friedel is top 10. So there is stolen base upside here. I am getting to McLain in particular at 4,600. That is a spot that I think makes some sense, because I don't need Hunter Brown to pitch poorly for Matt McLain to have a good game. And second base isn't a particularly strong position either. I just need McLain to, get a couple hits, get on base, steal once or twice, and you have a good game from Matt McLain, even if Hunter Brown only gives up 1 or 2 runs. So as a one-off, I think McLain makes some sense to be contrarian. Ellie De La Cruz goes without saying, same thing. So that's what I'm getting to from the Reds. And then on the Houston side, I'm not getting much. Neither is the field. Sub 5% ownership across the board. Nick Martinez is good at limiting power. He's just not very good at getting strikeouts. He's not a great DFS pitcher, but 118 expected ISO to righties since last year, 142 to lefties. Lefties have done some damage this year with a 208 expected ISO, but that is completely irrelevant because there's not a left-handed hitter in the Astros lineup. So there's not a lot that I like there. Jeremy Pena is affordably priced at 4K, leading off at shortstop. You have Paredes in Houston, a park that was built for him to hit home runs. Christian Walker is affordable for his power at 3,700, but I have a very difficult time singling anything out on Houston that I really like. If Yordan Alvarez were healthy, I would like the matchup for him, but he's not. San Francisco taking on Minnesota. In Minnesota, I am really interested to see what my exposures look like to this game right now, because I think it's a really interesting spot. You have Jordan Hicks going for San Francisco. Chris Paddock is going for the Twins. This is a significant home run park upgrade for the Giants hitters. As far as pitching goes, I'm not getting to either one. Both Hicks and Paddock are sub 5% owned. If I were to play one, I would rather it be Hicks at 7,400. He's actually been pretty unlucky this year. His strikeout numbers since moving into the starting rotation last year aren't very good, down around like 20.5%. But so far this year, his actual ERA is like north of 6. His expected ERA is 3.5. His expected WOBA is 20 to 30 points lower than his actual WOBA allowed. So I do think that he is pitching much better than his numbers suggest, but he's also just not somebody that I'm getting much of on this slate. Paddock has an expected ERA north of 5 so far this season, which brings me to the point that I was starting to make before. 7% projected ownership coming into Matt Chapman and Willy Adames, sub 5% to everybody else on the Giants. There is power in this lineup. Don't get confused because they don't hit a ton of home runs because they play their home games in San Francisco. There are guys in this lineup that do have power. Chris Paddock, so far this year, 214 expected ISO to left-handed hitters, 217 to righties. You go back to last year, 204 to lefties, 193 to righties. These right-handed bats, or these bats in general, on the Giants since last year against right-handed pitching, 193 expected ISO for Mike Yastrzemski, 237 for Adames, 203 for Chapman, 187 for Ramos. This year for Ramos, he's been even better with a 207 expected ISO. So I do think the Giants are very interesting here because if you go to Baseball Savant, look at their park factors, over the last 3 seasons, overall home run park factor for Target Field is 8th. for Oracle Park, where the Giants play their home games, it is dead last at 30th. So much better home run park for the Giants than where they play their home games. I'm getting over the field on Chapman right now, on Adames, on Yastrzemski. I'm mixing in some Ramos, some Wade, some Lee. But Chapman, Adames, Yastrzemski, the ones looking most interesting to me right now. 3,900 for Adames at shortstop, I think, stands out as a particularly strong play. On the other side for Minnesota, I'm having more trouble getting to them. If I were to get to one guy, Byron Buxton would, of course, be the first one that I go to. That's pretty much always going to be the case when you talk about the Twins. Not surprisingly, you can see that he does have the highest projection here. But, I mentioned Hicks, I think just being a better pitcher than his numbers give him credit for so far this year. Sub 100 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 103 expected ISO allowed to righties. That's basically no power at all. Going back to last year, he gives up some power, 145 to righties, 153 to lefties, but still nothing crazy. So it is a park downgrade for him. There is power in the Twins lineup, but between these two sides, I prefer the Giants because, one, you're getting that park upgrade that is not baked into their price, and two, Paddock gives up quite a bit more power than Jordan Hicks does. Next, we have the obvious, most appealing offensive game on the slate. We have a true horrors game with Randy Vasquez going for the Padres against Antonio Senzatella for the Rockies. Two guys that do not get strikeouts, two guys that do not limit power. It's a game that looks great for offense. Goes without saying, I'm not interested in the pitching. You are getting ownership coming into the Padres, obviously, as you would expect, but nothing too crazy. This is a team that I think probably gets a little bit more ownership in large field stuff, but in higher dollar stuff rather. But in large field, like 15 to 20% projected ownership to Tatis leading the way, 10 to 15% on Machado and Merrill, 5 to 10% on Cronenworth, Bogarts, Arise, less than that on everybody else. Senzatella does not, we have a relatively small sample because he has dealt with injuries over the last couple of seasons, but since 2023, 472 pitches thrown to righties, 475 to lefties, 264 expected ISO to lefties, 323 to righties. If you go back to 2022, you get a more usable sample size. The expected ISO to lefties drops to 164. To righties, it's still 232. Fernando Tatis looks great here at 6,500. The only negative I would point to for him is that Senzatella has been pretty good at not allowing stolen bases historically. And we know Tatis is looking to run a lot more this year. That doesn't mean he's not going to try. It just means that he's less likely to be successful. Machado, plenty of power from the right side at 5,700. Jackson Merrill, plenty of upside at 6K. Jake Cronenworth activated off the injured list after missing a month. DraftKings forgot that he's on the Padres, I guess, because he's only 4,400. This is somebody that has power. He's second base eligible. I like Cronenworth quite a bit. Xander Bogaerts obviously looks good. So Tatis, my favorite play from the Padres, but any of Tatis, Machado, Merrill, Cronenworth, Bogaerts in particular, I'm very happy to get to, and so will everybody else will be as well. On the other side, Randy Vasquez isn't any good either. He has some of the most drastic splits that you will see both this season and going back to last year. 7.9% strikeout percentage against left-handed hitters since the start of last season, 18.9 to righties. So he's not good at striking out righties, but he's at least like okay at it. Just impossibly bad at striking out lefties. 226 expected ISO to lefties over that time, 414 expected WOBA, 149 expected ISO to righties, 329 expected WOBA. This season, he has struck out 2.5% of the left-handed hitters that he has faced. I don't know what the actual number is. I assume that means he has struck out like one left-handed hitter or something like that. 277 expected ISO, 428 expected WOBA. The guy cannot get left-handed hitters out. Righties this year, sub 100 expected ISO. So basically for righties, you have Vasquez as like a not good, but competent major league pitcher at getting same-handed hitters out. And then it's just like nobody told him that he needs to face left-handed hitters or something because he has nothing against them. The problem here is that the Rockies suck, period. But two, the hitters for the most part that you want to get to on the Rockies are right-handed. So you can still go to Jordan Beck. You can still go to Bretton Doyle, Hunter Goodman. Those three righties are, I think, the priorities from the right side. And there's nothing wrong with that. They aren't getting a ton of ownership. They are still playing in Coors Field. They, in Doyle's case, stolen base upside as well. For the lefties, Ryan McMahon, 3,700 in this matchup is insane. Like if you could just have him face Vasquez for every at bat in this game, he'd probably be the best play on the slate. The problem here is that the Padres have 3 left-handed pitchers in their bullpen, and Vasquez just isn't particularly likely to go deep into this game. So you're probably getting like 2 plate appearances for Ryan McMahon in this great matchup against Vasquez, but then you're probably getting left-handed relievers thrown at him for the rest of the game. So he's still a good play because he's free and he has like the best matchup possible for his first couple plate appearances. But it is a spot where it's probably going to look worse for him, pretty bad for him once Vasquez gets out of the game. Michael Toglia, I think, is very interesting. I'm not getting much of him in my lineups right now, but he's 3,900 at first base. This is somebody kind of like I was talking about with Kyle Stowers in the Miami and White Sox game. Michael Toglia hits the ball hard. Michael Toglia swings and misses an insane amount of the time. He's facing a pitcher in Vasquez that does not get swings and misses, but Michael Toglia is also a switch hitter. So at least when they bring in left-handed relievers later on in the game, he'll turn around and hit right-handed. So I do think he's interesting, even though I do have less of him than those other guys that I mentioned. But the fact that you have those left-handed relievers in the bullpen does hurt the overall appeal of Rocky stacks because you're pretty likely to end up with a pinch hitter for Mickey Moniak. You're pretty likely to end up with a pinch hitter for Nick Martini once you get into that bullpen. So that is something to keep in mind. Nick Martini with a 35% chance of getting pinch hit for, Mickey Moniak with a 22% chance of getting pinch hit for. So keep that in mind, along with the fact that Ryan McMahon is likely to be facing lefties once Vasquez leaves this game. I am over the field overall, though, on the Rockies, at least right now, which, would be fine. I don't mind it. Next game, Baltimore taking on the Angels. I hope I have a lot of this one because I love this game. I bet the over 9.5 earlier. Sometimes when you're researching a game, you just get you look at a pitcher and you're like, oh, well, he really struggles with this one thing. And then he happens to be facing an offense that all they have is that one thing. And you kind of get it with both offenses here. Kyle Hendricks going for the Angels, Sugano going for the Orioles. Sugano's been okay in terms of results this year, but 4.46 xFIP, but a 3 ERA, 5.13 FIP. This is somebody that I expect to regress pretty hard as the league gets more familiar with him, as his luck starts to even out. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. He's allowed 1.6 home runs per 9 innings. So I'm getting a little bit of him at 7K just because this is a good strikeout matchup. He did magically strike out like 8 Yankees, so it can happen, even though it's not super likely to. But what I think is really interesting is that right-handed hitters have done the majority of the damage in terms of expected power so far this year. They only have a 143 actual ISO compared to 188 for lefties, but a 273 expected ISO compared to 199 for lefties. And this Angels lineup is very right-handed heavy, and they have plenty of power and also guys that swing and miss, but hit it hard when they hit it, just like I was saying with, Toglia and Stowers. Zach Neto has power. Soler has power. Ward has power. Ohapi has power. You have d'Arnaud in the lineup who has power. Now, obviously, on DraftKings, you can't play Ohapi and d'Arnaud together. Kyron Paris hitting 9th has power. He's not a great hitter overall, but this is a team that has plenty of right-handed power bats in a park that is good for home runs in general, going against a pitcher that has struggled to limit hard contact to righties, and there's a good reason for it as well. Sugano is somebody that, in terms of what he throws, is pretty reliant on his split-fingered fastball, but it's a pitch that he doesn't throw nearly as often to right-handed hitters as left-handed hitters, only about 11 to 12% usage against righties, 34% usage against lefties. And so it's a pitch that, does generally lead to reverse splits in a lot of pitchers. It's something that you saw with Kevin Gausman when he was on the Orioles back before he sort of got good. He would just refuse to throw his splitter to right-handed hitters, and it was his only good pitch. And so he would just get blasted by right-handed hitters. So you're kind of seeing something similar with Sugano so far. So I think that's interesting when you talk about Angels bats. And then on the other side, you have this Orioles team that has not been good offensively so far this year against right-handed pitching. They are 4th in strikeout percentage on their active roster, but they do have a 121 WRC plus, and they do have guys that have hit into bad luck. Like I said, Tyler O'Neill is back, so that is a big upgrade for their offense as well. Mullins, Rutschman, Henderson, Mountcastle, O'Hearn, O'Neill, Holiday, Laureano, Rivera in this lineup. The only hitter in this lineup that isn't like an above average power hitter is Emmanuel Rivera, or at least, has above average power, is Emmanuel Rivera batting ninth. So, Mullins has a 181 expected ISO against right-handed pitching since last year, or this season rather. Rutschman, well over 200 so far this year. He's been one of the more unlucky hitters in baseball. He is having, in terms of quality of contact, arguably his best season so far this year. And there's kind of this narrative around him because he got banged up halfway through last year. He had an awful second half, and then his actual numbers so far in the first half this year aren't any good. So there's kind of this narrative that like Rutschman fell off of a cliff. In terms of the way he's hitting the ball, he's hitting as good as he ever has, and it's going to even out eventually. And you're getting a park that is good for hitting home runs against a pitcher in Hendricks that does not miss a lot of bats, has the lowest stuff plus grade on the entire slate. Since last year, 173 expected ISO to lefties. So, Rutschman, if you can find the $4,700 salary, looks very good. I like Mullins a lot. Gunnar Henderson only has a 152 expected ISO against right-handed pitching this year, but you go back to last year, the type of damage Gunnar can do. Expected ISO north of 220. One thing I would mention for him is that, remember, he did miss the beginning of this year with a strained oblique. He injured it during spring. Maybe he's not playing at 100%, and that's why you're seeing him struggle. I don't know if that's the case or not. But of the Orioles lineup, I really wish that they had Kjerstad in this lineup instead of Rivera somehow. Like, I don't know what the positions would look like. That's irrelevant, but and it's why it didn't happen, I guess. But I wanted Kjerstad to be in the lineup, but you're getting O'Neill instead, which is fine. But Mullins, Rutschman, Henderson, Mountcastle, O'Hearn, O'Neill, Holiday, Laureano, like that is a lot of power upside here. And I am getting to the Orioles higher than the field right now. I want to get to them more than the field. The only guy getting double-digit ownership right now is Gunnar at 5K. But I really like this as a get-right spot for the Orioles. I like both sides of this game. I think there's a lot of runs scored here just with the way these two teams match up. Toronto taking on Seattle in a game where I could not be any more enthusiastically in the opposite direction than I just was. You go from Angel Stadium with two offenses that have power against two pitchers that don't miss bats and give up power to T-Mobile Park, the worst place for scoring runs in baseball, the eighth worst place for hitting home runs in baseball. Kevin Gausman going for the Blue Jays, Luis Castillo going for the Mariners, 26% projected ownership to Gausman, 15% to Castillo. The Mariners have been really, 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 really good offensively so far this year. Their WRC plus against right-handed pitching is the best in baseball at 128. Their strikeout percentage is down to 20.5%, which ranks 16th. Last year they were a team that had power but struck out a ton. They're not striking out this year. That being said, though, the park downplays power a ton, and Kevin Gausman has shown improvement this year after dropping off last year. His strikeout percentage last year dropped down to 21.5%. This year it's back up to 24. Stuff plus has jumped from 95.7 back up to 101.8. Fastball velo is up half a mile per hour. So you're seeing better stuff from Gausman. You're seeing more strikeouts. He has given up power to both sides of the plate. That's been the negative with him so far this season, even with the improved stuff. He's allowed a 245 expected ISO to righties and 208 to lefties. But again, this park does help to mitigate home runs. He also is not good at preventing stolen bases. So you do run into that same issue that I was talking about with Hunter Brown, where he can just give up an extra earned run or two because the wrong guy gets on base and suddenly that walk or that bloop single is a double or a triple. Especially, with this Mariners team that does have speed. But I do like Gausman here at 9K. It's not a perfect matchup, but again, you just don't have perfect matchups really on this slate outside of guys that cost $10,000 or $11,000. So I'm getting the Gausman. Castillo getting some ownership at 8,400. He's technically in that same group, I think, with Nola, with like, there are things I don't like, but he's in a good pitcher's park. He's historically a good pitcher. He's only 8,400. All of that is true. There's two things that I really don't like here and why I'm hoping that I'm lower than the field on Castillo. It's why our projections on Castillo are lower than I've seen elsewhere, is I know that we're factoring this stuff in. But for one, the Blue Jays are just a tough team to strike out. And, that's been said 100 times already this season. But their active roster ranks 24th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, 18.8% K percentage. They've been a below average offense in terms of production. That'll probably change sooner than later. They have quality hitters, but they don't strike out a lot. But this park is good for getting strikeouts. It's not good for scoring runs, et cetera, et cetera. But Luis Castillo seems like he has fallen off Luis Castillo has so far this year fallen off of a cliff. Strikeout percentage last year, 24.3%. This year down to 18.2%. Stuff plus last year, 103, down to 93.7 this year in 38 and a third innings pitched. Almost a 10-point drop in stuff plus, in addition to a 6-point drop in strikeout percentage. Fastball velo down between half a mile per hour and a full mile per hour from 95.5 to 94.8. Not to say that Luis Castillo is just done and he's never going to get it back, but this is somebody that you had kind of seen starting to slip in recent seasons anyway. Somebody that was getting bailed out a lot by T-Mobile Park, where granted he is pitching again tonight. Last year you saw him give up a lot of power to lefties. This year it's flipped. Righties are doing the damage. But you're just kind of seeing this drop from him, and I do buy into it, at least to some extent. There's more than one red flag there, and then you also get the tough strikeout matchup. So it's not to say he can't have a good game, but it's to say that, if the field's just going to completely ignore what Luis Castillo has been this year, I can find other relatively risky pitchers to play instead. Offensively, it's going to be tough to want a lot of anything in this game given the park. I did mention the stolen base upside for the Mariners. Jorge Polanco has been very good this year. $4,900 second baseman. I don't mind that. Has power and some stolen base upside. Julio Rodriguez, power and stolen base upside. Don't forget that Cal Raleigh will run a little bit if he gets on base. On the Blue Jays side, I mentioned that Castillo's given up more power to righties so far this year, so that would point you towards like Vlad Guerrero. But Anthony Santander, 3,700, because he's been very bad so far this year for the Blue Jays. That's going to turn around sooner than later. He's an above average hitter. We know that. So getting him at 3,700 just from an upside standpoint makes some sense. But overall, not a particularly appealing game when you have Gausman Castillo in Seattle. Now back to games where you do have high run totals. Dodgers taking on the Diamondbacks in Arizona. Roki Sasaki for the Dodgers. Eduardo Rodriguez for the Diamondbacks. This is the other spot. There were two spots I wanted to remember to mention with our projections that I disagree with and that I changed a little bit. Right now, we have a relatively high projection on Eduardo Rodriguez. The reason for that is that our lineup provider, for whatever reason, has the Dodgers projected lineup as the one that they typically use against right-handed pitchers. So it has like Muncy and Conforto. And if for whatever reason the Dodgers run out a lefty-heavy lineup today, Rodriguez actually does have significant strikeout upside because the lefties strike out a lot, and Rodriguez is a good strikeout pitcher. The problem is the lineup the Dodgers are probably actually going to play, instead of those left-handed bats, it's going to have Kike Hernandez. It's going to have Miguel Rojas, two low K percentage guys against left-handed pitching, replacing guys that strike out like 28+% of the time. So the way that our projections are created, we run a bunch of sims in our in-house model, and you're seeing the results on the screen. When we run that sim with the lineup that we're getting from our lineup provider right now, you're just getting too many strikeouts for Eduardo Rodriguez because it thinks he's facing these left-handed bats that he's probably not going to face. So I did downgrade the projection on him a little bit. I did still get to him a little bit at 8,500. Again, it's not a safe matchup. Clearly, it's an okay strikeout matchup, but probably not really, depending on the lineup. But at the same time, if he's not going to get any ownership, he's going to be 1/5 the ownership of Luis Castillo. I don't mind it as a pivot. Just kind of hope for the best. Kind of like you did with Brandon Pfaadt last night, which obviously came through. He was in the lineup that won me a tournament. Not saying that has anything to do with what Rodriguez is going to do tonight, but Rodriguez is a good pitcher. He does have standalone strikeout upside, 23.5% K percentage, 3.87 xFIP since last year. So I don't know if I end up getting to him or not. I am right now, but I can make the case for him from a just be contrarian, bet on talent standpoint. I just wanted to point out that I am a little bit lower. I think this projection on the screen right now is a little bit high because it's factoring in what I think is going to be not the correct lineup. On the other side, not interested in Sasaki here. He hasn't been very good since coming over. He has only struck out 18% of hitters. He's walked 15%, 5.2 xFIP, and also the Diamondbacks are a good offense. They rank 14th in strikeout percentage, 124 WRC plus is near the top of the league. So no interest in Sasaki, and neither does the field. Offensively, there are certainly bats you can get to here. Starting on the Dodger side, lefty for Shohei Ohtani. But remember, this is somebody that has an expected ISO north of 200 against left-handed pitching. He's just insanely good. He gives you stolen base upside as well. Mookie Betts, Will Smith, I think your two best Right-handed bats, Will Smith is only 4,100 as well. Freddie Freeman hits left-handed pitching well. I'm having more trouble getting to him than Smith and Ohtani and Betts, but if you're stacking, I think you can look there. You probably will get some value at the bottom of the order with Chris Taylor, with Rojas, with Kike at 3K. Those guys do carry pinch hit risk later in the game. You have James Outman up now. You'll probably have Muncy coming off the bench. So do keep that in mind with the cheap bats that are probably going to be at the bottom of the order for the Dodgers. They're probably getting pinch hit for once a right-handed reliever comes in. But Shohei Ohtani, Will Smith, Mookie Betts in particular, I think look very good, and you don't need me to tell you that. On the other side, for the Diamondbacks going up against Sasaki, I'm not getting too much of them. Neither is the field. I wouldn't mind it as a contrarian team just because they are so good and because Sasaki has walked so many hitters this year. You could just get in this situation where you constantly have guys on base. Obviously, the walk itself is not giving you upside, but you start getting these at-bats with two guys on, with the bases loaded, and just kind of that carousel for your stack. But I'm not getting too much of it. So far this season, from a power standpoint, Sasaki has allowed a 296 expected ISO to lefties. That's not good. A 104 expected ISO to righties is very good. There is left-handed power on this team as well. Obviously, Corbin Carroll has it, but Josh Naylor has it. Batting cleanup, Pavin Smith DHing. Smith does have pinch hit risk as the DH. Ketel Marte has power. So this 1 through 4 of left-handed bats against Sasaki can certainly make life difficult for him. And then you have Suarez, Moreno that have power as well. So certainly a high upside stack. I think I would throw them back into that bucket with the Mets, the Red Sox, teams like that. And then finally wrapping this one up, Yankees taking on the A's in Oakland. Oswaldo Vito is going for the A's. This was the one that was randomly showing up in lineups for me right now. And I don't know why, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to continue to be the case. At least I hope to God it doesn't. Will Warren getting 6% ownership at 6,300. If you need to pay down for a pitcher, I think he's reasonable just from a talent standpoint because he does have good strikeout stuff. But the Yankees do generally have a short leash on him. They don't let him work that deep into games. 25.5% K percentage as a starter since last year. The A's as a whole also don't strike out a lot this season. It's kind of deceptive because Jacob Wilson doesn't strike out ever. And Miguel Andujar so far this season has struck out 5% of the time. But at the same time, Brent Rooker is the only qualified hitter on the A's this year that has struck out more than 24% of the time against right-handed pitching. So it hasn't been a great strikeout matchup. It has been a good offense overall. And this park, the expectation for this park from a win standpoint, from a home run standpoint, is the opposite of what I was saying about Tampa Bay, where the general wind direction, there's article on this. Eno Saris put it out, and then there was another one on Fangraphs earlier in the season. The expected wind direction or general wind direction during the day in Sacramento is blowing in, and then at night it's blowing out. So you should actually see it play as a better home run park at night, which is counterintuitive because I think normally people think about during the day, it's warmer, ball carries better, all that's true. This should actually be a better home run park at night. And now you're getting this Yankees offense and this A's offense that both have a lot of power. Aaron Judge, goes without saying, play him if you can find the salary. Beto was good at limiting power last season. It has not been the case so far this year. 171 expected ISO to righties with just a 7.5% K percentage. 282 expected ISO to lefties. Aaron Judge, Ben Rice, Trent Grisham, anybody on the Yankees you can get to looks fine. I think that Grisham and Judge are the priorities, followed by Ben Rice. But a lot of power upside, 5 to 10% ownership across the board on the Yankees, with the exception of Aaron Judge getting 20%. And then on the A's side, they're not getting any ownership, and I think that they should be. Again, I don't think that they're a team you should just be jamming into lineups. There's a lot of teams I like on this slate, but for a team that's just sub 5% ownership across the board, going up against a pitcher in Warren that has allowed a 175 expected ISO to lefties this year, 163 to righties. He's not bad at limiting power, but it's not like he doesn't give it up at all. He's a good strikeout pitcher, but the A's have actually been good at putting the ball in play. We're expecting the ball to carry well tonight. Tyler Soderstrom has a ton of power. He got his MPE back as well, first base and outfield eligible at 4,600. Langoliers is always going to be one of your better power hitting catchers. His ownership should stay low because he's only $100 more expensive than Will Smith is. Brent Rooker has a bunch of power at 5,400. Lawrence Butler is only 4,400. That's the guy I'm getting the most of here. Stolen base upside, power upside. So not a priority stack, but again, just another team that I like. In particular, Tyler Soderstrom and Lawrence Butler, I like quite a bit for the A's. So to recap, the pitchers I'm getting the most of right now, and this is going to change, but Gossman, Williams, Nola, Hunter Brown, and Max Meyer, I think are the two pitchers that like they're luxuries, but if you can find a way to get to them, like you want to, I think Hunter Brown is, he's the highest projected pitcher on the slate. I think he's the one that you would feel, quote unquote, the best about, the more of him that you can get to. At catcher, Will Smith, Agustin Ramirez, Adley Rutschman, my top three. At first base, Yandy Diaz, Ben Rice, Tyler Soderstrom, Matt McLean, Jake Cronenworth, Bryce Turang at second base, Yandy Diaz, Manny Machado, Ryan McMahon, Matt Chapman at third, Gunnar Henderson, Willie Adames, Zach Neto at short, Brenton Doyle, Fernando Tatis, Aaron Judge just paying up in the outfield, then paying down a little bit to Jordan Beck, to Lawrence Butler, who I think gives you a lot of value. Jackson Churio, I like Jesus Sanchez a lot. And then from a stacking standpoint, overall stacks, San Diego, Colorado, New York, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, my top six. 5-mans looking at Baltimore, Tampa Bay, Milwaukee, Dodgers, San Francisco. So that wraps this one up. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, all of that. Don't forget to sign up for the Run the Sims projections using the link in the description below. Thanks for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday.